Hi, I'm Jerry Laird, your host on Carousel, and I'm very happy to have you meet a very good friend of mine named Lou Sabini, and he is interested in old movies, and it's one of my very favorite subjects. And when I say old movies, well, to me they're not old movies. Nothing is old unless it's before I was born. And since most of your movies are after I was born.
Well, no. Actually, Jerry, I do collect many of the silent films from the teens and the 20s.
Oh, okay.
And then I go into the 30s and 40s. After 1950, I kind of get hazy.
So do the movies.
I sort of lose interest after the golden age of Hollywood, when we more or less progressed into the silver age, although I won't say progressed.
When you say, you must have gotten interested. What really got you interested? Because I can't really tell you why I was interested, but I was hooked from the time I started realizing that there were movies.
Okay, well, the way I got interested, I can remember it quite vividly. It was in 1956. I was 4 at the time, and my mom took my sister and I to see a movie. I think it was playing at the Old Strand in Stamford, and it was Dance With Me, Henry. It happened to be Abbott and Costello's last film, and Abbott and Costello happened to be my first love when I was a kid. And we lived in North Stamford at the time, and there weren't many kids to play with, and so I just used to watch television all the time. And you know, my favorites were the old comedians, Laurel and Hardy, Abbott and Costello, the Marx Brothers, the Three Stooges. So now we could segue into Laurel and Hardy.
Oh, right. Well, yeah. No, now you are so hooked on Laurel and Hardy that are you head of the organization? Or
yes. What? Yeah. I'm head of the Stamford chapter, or the Stamford tent of the Sons of the Desert. We are the One Good Turn tent, named after their 1931 short subject that Stan Laurel wrote. And I've been the Grand Sheik now, I think since 1998, if I'm not mistaken. So 10 years I've been the Grand Sheik. The tent has been going on since 1992. That's when it was founded by Rob Birarelli, who is now the Grand Sheik of the Leave 'em Laughing tent of Bridgeport, Connecticut.
Yeah, well, he was our guest on this show several years. Oh, here we are. Look at this. Tell us what we're seeing.
Yeah, that's a photograph from one of Laurel and Hardy's later films at Fox. This was actually after their heyday. That's a photograph from Jitterbugs from 1943. And the lady there is Vivian Blaine, who later appeared in Guys and Dolls. And the gentleman is Bob Bailey. And of course, that's Stan Laurel on the left and Oliver Hardy on the right. And that was probably their best film that they made for 20th Century Fox, after they had worked 13 years for Hal Roach. They started as a comedy team back in 1927.
What was Swiss Miss and Nosemaid? Was that Hal Roach?
Swiss Miss was Hal Roach. That was from 1938.
Okay. Because that's the era that I really liked them.
Oh, yes, yeah. I mean, their best films were made between 1927 and 1940. Those were the Roach years.
What's the one about the West? Go West?
Way Out West.
Way Out West.
That's my personal favorite.
And that little dance scene in it.
Yes, yeah. Commence Your Dancing.
Yeah.
And
it's a shame we didn't we didn't get a shot of that.
A shot of it? Oh, yeah. Well,
that's too bad. Well, maybe later. And
you never know.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, go on. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but you just kept reminding me of all these things that I really loved when I was a kid about them.
Well, you know, I started collecting Laurel and Hardy films when I was 12 in 16 millimeter. And in 1962...
How did you find out they were for sale, or how did you get them?
Well, you know, there was a place in Davenport, Iowa called Black Hawk Films.
Oh, I remember that, yeah.
And Black Hawk used to sell the Hal Roach product, and it was legal to buy them.
Yeah.
So, you know, I would save my quarters, or if I was being good, my dad would get me one for my birthday. And so, yeah, I started collecting their movies. And in 1962, I had read the book Mr. Laurel and Mr. Hardy by Jack McCabe. And at the ending of it, it said, "Today Stan Laurel lives in Santa Monica, California." And my father said to me, "Gee, why don't you write to the guy?" So I did, and lo and behold, 2 weeks later, Stan Laurel wrote me a letter. And he also autographed a couple of pictures for me. He sent a few photographs. And I remained a pen pal of Stan Laurel's for 3 years. And years later, when I got married in 1975, my wife and I went out to Santa Monica, and we met Ida Laurel, Stan's wife. And it was funny, when we went there, I'll never forget this. We were walking into her apartment, and she answered the door, and she said, "Lou, you just missed Jerry Lewis. He just left here. He's just here visiting me." So I missed out on that one.
Well, I don't think you missed out on much.
Oh, so I hear.
Yeah. No, I worked with Jerry Lewis.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh,
And let's go
wow.
back to Laurel and Hardy. Well, when did Laurel die?
He died on February 23rd, 1965.
Okay.
And yeah, he was a wonderful person. I spoke to him personally in Christmas week of 1964, a mere 2 months before he passed away. I called him up on the telephone at his apartment in Santa Monica.
Ah.
And it's funny because his wife would always answer the phone first. She would screen the calls for him.
Oh yeah, no, that's smart.
Yeah.
Really.
So,
Well, how did you? Well, go on. How did you continue buying then, and when did you decide to start this massive collection? And it's a good thing you never moved. You would have had a problem.
well, now I sure would have, because I've got now close to 1,000 titles in my collection. I mean, Laurel and Hardy, I have just about everything they made. I mean, there are a few of their films that are lost, like Hats Off and The Rogue Song, just don't exist. But I have pretty much everything that they made, and we use them for our Sons of the Desert meetings. Incidentally, our meetings, for anybody who's interested, our meetings are held every first Sunday of the month in Stamford on Hope Street at Bella Luna Restaurant, and it's a good Italian restaurant. It costs $20 per person.
Oh, yeah.
You come in, we give you a great Italian cuisine, and drinks, of course, are extra. And we show Laurel and Hardy movies and other movies by Hal Roach, like the Our Gang comedies, Charlie Chase, the Thelma Todd, Zazu Pitts series.
Oh, right. Going back to your collecting, though, did your parents threaten to throw you out of the house at any time when you started growing up?
You know, I have a funny story for you. Years later, when I was in college, I was attending School of Visual Arts in Manhattan. And my college professor, my film history teacher, was William K. Everson. And he was renowned, as you know. He's written 16 books, hundreds of articles. As a matter of fact, there's even a website online with all of his articles that he had written for the Theodore Huff Society and the New School and NYU. So he taught at all these places. But one afternoon, I asked Bill, gee, I'd like you to come over to the house and see my collection. And he came to Stanford, and my mother made this beautiful dinner for him. And we were sitting downstairs, and my mom and dad said, Professor Everson, don't you think it's about time Lou stopped collecting Laurel and Hardy movies? And Bill said, absolutely. I think he should start collecting other things, and I should branch out into others. So my parents, I'm sure, wanted to kill him. And I took his advice, of course. And years later, in 1973, when I met my future wife, she took a liking to my hobby as well. She started taking film courses so she could talk my lingo, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so anyhow, she would come home from the library and bring movies to, you know, that was the first time I ever saw movies like The Lady Vanishes by Hitchcock. I mean, the Ferguson Library had virtually all the Alfred Hitchcock British films.
Yeah.
So I was branching out. And I can remember my wife bought me my first print of Casablanca back in 1974 when we were dating. And
it's funny to hear you talking about this, because having lived through all these, it's kind of an interesting trip.
Yeah.
Because it's as if when you mentioned Hitchcock, well, I saw all those on first run only in Omaha, where I was brought up. A lot of the Hitchcock movies did not play downtown; they'd play in the naves before. I mean, not before. That's the only place they'd play. And I remember seeing a movie called The Demon Barber of Fleet Street, and which it's a very different. It's not a different story than the one that the one made into the musical. But it takes a different approach. In the musical, he's somewhat sympathetic. He was done wrong. In the original movie, and possibly in real life, he really was the Demon Barber of Fleet Street. And it was an old Edgar Wallace novel, so that they did it from.
So those prints must have looked just absolutely gorgeous back then on the first run. They didn't.
They played them too much, and then they you know, if you saw a brand new print, but they didn't make new prints for you.
They were well worn.
Yeah.
Huh?
Oh yeah.
It's like some of my prints, I'm sure.
Yeah. Because some of them really were so poor you wonder how they had the nerve to make us pay money for them.
Oh my gosh. Well, movies back then, they cost like 25 cents to get into a...
No, that was a roadshow price. It was a nickel and a dime.
Oh, when you're in Omaha?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it was everywhere too. I mean, Candy bars were 3 for a dime.
Oh,
now
wow.
they're 4 for $3 or something, or 3 for $4, something like that. Same size candy bar.
Yeah, yeah.
So.